If the full range of voters actually voted, our political leaders, who are exquisitely attuned followers, would go where the votes are, away from the extremes, said Eric Liu of Time. Hi, my name is Olivia Pineda-Andersen, and I appreciate this opportunity to share with you the reasons why we should have compulsory voting rather than optional voting in the United States. Today, I'll be telling you about the weak arguments against compulsory voting, how requiring voting would lead to a higher voter turnout and greater political legitimacy, and how it would also reduce political polarization and extremism in our government. The idea behind compulsory voting is that eligible United States citizens should be legally required to vote because our democracy can't effectively govern for the needs and thoughts of all Americans without Americans contributing their ideas and beliefs. First, I'd like to touch on the weak arguments against compulsory voting. Some of these arguments are that uninformed voters will randomly enter a vote out of requirement, and that it is an infringement of Americans' First Amendment rights to require voting. However, random votes would essentially affect elections the same way as a lack of votes, except they would also bring the more informed citizens who simply choose not to vote out to the polls to even out the scales. And to combat the First Amendment argument, the Constitution also has the 15th Amendment, which is the right to vote without discrimination. And with all our talk of democracy, Americans should be encouraged to exercise all the rights we've earned and fought for, especially when it impacts the choice of our leaders. Second, higher voter turnout. Stanford University's article titled "Stanford Political Scientists Make the Case for Mandatory Voting" explains that in Australia, although it is compulsory to vote, the government does not heavily enforce legal punishments if citizens don't vote. But instead, the fact that voting is the law is enough to encourage higher voter turnouts because of a feeling of moral duty. So in America, we can expect the same effect for many voters, that they will feel a greater obligation if we make voting the law. And all those who consistently participate anyway will continue to do so. However, for Americans who do not feel a sense of moral obligation yet, fees and legal consequences would become their motivation to go out to the polls and cast their votes. Third, greater political legitimacy. Former President Obama said in a CNN clip, when asked about how to weaken the power of money in American politics, quote, "It would be transformative if everybody voted. That would counteract money more than anything. If everybody voted, it would completely change the political map of this country, because those who don't opt to vote are young, lower income, and they're skewed more towards immigrant and minority roots. They're often the folks who are scratching and climbing to get into the middle class. There's a reason why people want to keep them out of the polls." End quote. In today's government, money plays a larger role than ever, and those who aren't the rich and privileged would be more equally represented if voting were required, because all the minorities that don't cast their votes out of a doubt that they'll affect elections will begin to see the large effect on our elections when their valuable votes pool together in the process of electing our leaders. Lastly, is reducing political polarization and extremism in our government. By making voting required in the US, there would be a larger group of voters for politicians to convince to vote for them. This would drive our politicians away from the extremes and closer to a middle ground, while still allowing them to represent their party's beliefs, however they choose. This would drive politicians away from extreme left or right ends, which would satisfy more American citizens, even if it is not their party being elected, because the government would lean back towards focusing on serving the people more than serving this or that party. So, although there are arguments against requiring citizens to vote, making voting compulsory in the United States would greatly increase voter turnout, cause greater political legitimacy, reduce political polarization, help equalize representation in elections, and requiring voting would incentivize citizens to be more knowledgeable on national events and worldwide dilemmas before heading to the polls, leading to a more informed population, and all of this working toward improved accuracy in elections. I agree with Eric Liu of Time. If everybody who's able to would actually vote, our government would begin to even out and steer away from extremes to focus on the well-being and satisfaction of the people instead of so strongly involving red or blue agendas in campaigns and terms. Political leaders would likely turn back towards government true purpose of serving the people. Although the path of compulsory voting is an uphill battle, while we wait for any law to pass regarding this extremely necessary step in our country, I urge those who are able to exercise their right to vote. Make your voice heard. Every ballot counts in any election, whether that be local or national. Do not let others speak for you, and do not let your opportunity to choose our leaders or policies go to waste. Thank you for your time and attention, and with your newly acquired knowledge of compulsory voting, please consider pushing for this solution to keep our democracy strong.